Imagine walking across a vast African grassland with no house to run to, no vehicle, and no phone to call for help. Somewhere behind you, a giant cat could be stalking through the grass. Above you, an eagle might be circling. At the water's edge, a crocodile could be waiting just beneath the surface. That was roughly the world our ancestors faced around 2.3 million years ago in Africa. They emerged from small, lightly built Australopithecine ancestors with no enormous fangs, no sharp claws, and no great speed. The problem was that nearly everything around them seemed better equipped to kill. So how did our ancestors survive long enough for us to be here? One of the most terrifying names in the prehistoric world was Smilodon, the famous saber-toothed cat with canine teeth nearly as long as an adult human forearm. But this was not simply a cat with ridiculously oversized teeth. Smilodon was heavily muscled and powerfully built, with a body that looked more like a modern bear than a modern lion. Its massive forelimbs made it an excellent ambush predator. It could hide, wait patiently, then explode from cover and overpower its victim before there was much chance to react. If an ancient human allowed one to get close enough, the race was basically over before it began. But wait, watching the grass was not enough, because danger could also come straight out of the sky. Large prehistoric birds of prey were capable of attacking small hominins, especially children. The famous Tong child fossil, around 2 to 3 million years old, bears scratches and puncture marks around the eye sockets that are consistent with damage caused by an eagle's talons. Think about that for a second. Our ancestors sometimes had to scan the bushes for predators while also keeping an eye on the sky. Survival was apparently a full-time job. And what happened when you got thirsty? Things became even worse. Along rivers and lakes, Crocodilus anthropophagus, a giant horned crocodile that may have grown more than 7 meters long, could lie almost motionless beneath the water. Ancient hominin ankle bones from Olduvai Gorge preserve paired bite marks consistent with this crocodile. Its hunting strategy required very little effort. No long chase. No dramatic pursuit. It simply had to wait for someone to approach the water at exactly the wrong moment. Even the trees did not guarantee safety. Ancient leopards were powerful, intelligent climbers perfectly capable of carrying prey off the ground. At Swartkrans Cave, an early hominin skull was found with 2 circular punctures matching the spacing of leopard canine teeth. The possible scene is disturbing. A leopard catches its victim, drags the body into a tree above the cave entrance, feeds there, and bones eventually fall into the cave below. So prehistoric caves were not always cozy little shelters. Sometimes they were more like the downstairs floor of a leopard restaurant. For years, researchers could only make educated guesses about which predators had left marks like these. Then, modern technology entered a mystery millions of years old. Artificial intelligence models were trained on hundreds of tooth marks produced by modern hyenas, crocodiles, leopards, and other carnivores. Researchers could then compare those patterns with damage preserved on ancient fossils. The results showed that some bite marks found on Homo habilis jaw remains were strongly consistent with leopard attacks. A prehistoric cold case had finally gained a much clearer suspect, but the danger was not limited to the open grasslands. Caves, which we often imagine as safe prehistoric shelters, could actually be fiercely contested real estate. Ancient humans wanted them. Hyenas wanted them too. At Thomas Quarry I in Morocco, a human femur roughly 500,000 years old shows gnawing and cracking associated with hyena teeth. Evidence like this suggests that humans and hyenas repeatedly occupied the same kinds of shelters, placing them in direct and dangerous competition. A cave could protect you from the weather, but first you had to make sure something with much stronger jaws had not already claimed it. By now, the obvious question is impossible to ignore. If our ancestors were hunted from the air, attacked near the water, stalked across the grasslands, and threatened even inside caves, why did they not simply disappear? This is where the story begins to change. Humans increasingly relied on vigilance, cooperation, and collective defense. One unarmed human was vulnerable. 10 humans watching different directions, warning one another, and reacting together were a completely different problem. Slowly, the creature that had spent so long living as prey began moving toward the other side of the food chain. One major turning point came when our ancestors left the trees and began spending more of their lives walking on two legs. As the climate changed and forests shrank, they were increasingly forced to cross wide stretches of savanna in search of food. Walking upright freed the hands, allowing them to carry food, transport objects, and eventually make tools. It sounds like a brilliant evolutionary upgrade until you notice one rather serious flaw. Two legs did not make humans faster than a leopard. In fact, if survival had depended entirely on speed, humans would have been in serious trouble. Leopards, lions, and saber-toothed cats could accelerate far faster than we could. But here's where it gets interesting. Standing upright gave early humans a higher view over the tall savanna grass. Instead of noticing a predator only when it was already a few meters away, they had a better chance of spotting movement at a distance and warning the rest of the group. We did not survive by evolving to outrun the monsters. We began surviving by seeing them before they expected to be seen. Spotting danger early was useful, but it was not enough. Our ancestors also had a surprisingly simple way to make predators think twice: stand tall. When several people rose upright together, raised their arms, and shouted, they suddenly looked bigger, stranger, and harder to judge. For large cats that had to weigh the risk of every attack, that hesitation could matter. One person standing alone was still vulnerable. A whole group towering together and making an enormous amount of noise was a very different target. Walking upright also offered an advantage most people never think about: dealing with heat. Around midday on the savanna, the sun beats down almost directly from above. A two-legged body can expose less surface area to direct sunlight than the horizontal body of a four-legged animal. That may have helped early humans remain active during the hottest part of the day, when many predators had to rest to avoid overheating. In other words, our ancestors did not always need to be stronger than a lion. Sometimes they just needed a better work schedule. The human body was also becoming remarkably efficient at traveling long distances on two legs. A short, broad pelvis, an S-shaped spine, and inward-angled thigh bones all help keep the body balanced while walking. It is not an ideal design for explosive sprinting, but it is extremely effective for covering ground. On a vast savanna, being able to travel for kilometers in search of water, food, and shelter could matter far more than being incredibly fast for a few seconds. But here's where things get even more interesting. Humans were not only changing the way they moved, their way of seeing the world mattered too. Primate trichromatic vision allows us to distinguish shades of red, green, and blue better than many other mammals. That ability may originally have been useful for spotting ripe fruit and young leaves. But in a landscape filled with predators, it could also help the eye notice subtle differences between fur, shadow, and vegetation. Sometimes a tiny patch of color that did not quite belong in the bushes could mean the difference between walking away and becoming lunch. And there is one particular shape that the primate brain seems unusually sensitive to: snakes. For millions of years, venomous snakes and constrictors have posed recurring threats to many primates. Studies suggest that humans and monkeys can detect snake-like shapes very quickly among other objects. Think about that for a second. You may not consciously know where the snake is, but part of your brain seems ready to scream, "Something long and wiggly is over there. Do not step on it." Some hypotheses go even further, suggesting that features around the eyes, including eyebrows and eyelashes, might make a face appear watchful even when the eyes are closed. The idea is that predators sensitive to gaze might hesitate if they cannot tell whether their potential prey is truly asleep. This remains debated, but it points to a broader survival principle that matters much more. Making a predator believe you have already noticed it can be almost as valuable as actually seeing it first. And instead of always trying to disappear, humans began doing almost the opposite. They made noise, stayed close together, and became extremely noticeable. In nature, animals often survive in one of two broad ways: avoid being detected, or send a clear signal that attacking them is a bad idea. Humans did not have toxic colors like poison frogs or defensive spines like porcupines. But a group of people shouting, throwing stones, and advancing together could deliver a warning that was just as convincing. From there, sound itself became a kind of weapon. Picture 10 people shouting, stomping, and striking stones together in the same rhythm. The sudden noise, synchronized movement, and sight of multiple bodies advancing at once could confuse a predator trying to decide what to do. A lion searching for one vulnerable target now faced a moving wall of sound. And that may have helped lay the groundwork for something deeply human, using rhythm to bind a group together. Once individual cries became synchronized, another effect appeared. It became harder to tell exactly how many people were making the noise. Several voices blending together could sound larger and more intimidating than any one person alone. At the same time, rhythm helped the people themselves feel as though they were acting as a single unit. The fear did not vanish. It became shared. And because humans are strange creatures, sometimes the thing that makes us brave is simply hearing the person beside us still shouting too. That kind of synchronized action could produce what is often described as a battle trance-like state. When a group moves, shouts, and acts together, the body can release adrenaline, endorphins, and other neurochemicals that temporarily reduce the sensation of fear, exhaustion, and pain. An individual might instinctively want to run, but a coordinated group can keep holding its ground. That was a major shift. Humans were no longer only trying to survive encounters with predators. They were learning how to make the predators consider running instead. Humans were not signaling danger with sight and sound alone. Our bodies also produce enormous amounts of sweat, especially while moving under the heat of the savanna. Active sweat glands, combined with hair around the armpits, can help body odor spread through the air. Some hypotheses suggest that this distinctive scent may have alerted predators that humans were nearby, especially when an entire group was present. It was hardly a suit of armor, but in the wild, making a predator hesitate for even a few seconds can sometimes be enough to stay alive. Then humans began changing their appearance as well. Red ochre could be ground into powder, mixed with liquid, and spread across the skin, producing striking patches of color. Ochre probably served many purposes, including decoration, ritual, and possibly skin protection. But some researchers have also suggested that bright coloration may have made the human body more visually noticeable across open landscapes. Picture a group of red-painted humans shouting, moving together, and holding spears. To a predator deciding whether to attack, that no longer looks very much like a free meal. And this is where the relationship between humans and predators began to flip. Instead of always running from lions, humans could start following them. Circling vultures might reveal that a carcass was nearby. A lion could bring down an animal, begin feeding, and then suddenly find a group of humans approaching, shouting, stomping, and throwing stones. This behavior is known as aggressive scavenging, actively forcing carnivores away from their kill. It sounds reckless. That is because it was. What made a strategy like that more practical was something humans could do that lions could not: throw. The human shoulder has an unusually wide range of motion, while the waist and upper body can work together to generate powerful throws from a safer distance. A stone did not have to kill a predator. It only had to hurt, startle, or convince the animal that staying near the carcass meant getting hit again. In a sense, humans had invented long-range teeth and claws long before bows or more sophisticated weapons appeared. And the reward for taking that risk could be enormous. The carcass of an elephant, hippo, or other large animal could contain enough meat, fat, and marrow to feed a group for a long time. Energy-rich fat and protein became valuable fuel for the body and for an increasingly demanding brain. The human stomach is also highly acidic, reaching around pH 1.5 under many conditions, which helps destroy many microbes that enter with food. But gaining access to large amounts of meat created a completely new problem. How do you keep it from spoiling? The answer would come from something most animals instinctively avoid: fire. Evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa indicates that humans were using fire around 1 million years ago, while other proposed evidence may reach even further back. Fire probably offered several advantages at once, but one was immediately useful. Many predators are reluctant to approach an active flame. For perhaps the first time, humans could place a wall of light between themselves and whatever was moving in the darkness. Fire solved another problem too. Meat exposed to heat and smoke loses moisture, cooks, or becomes smoked, allowing it to last longer than raw meat left sitting in the open. Just as importantly, a fire burning through the night could make a campsite far less inviting to leopards, hyenas, and other predators. Humans no longer had to depend entirely on sleeping in trees. They could gather around the flames, defend their food, and defend one another. Then, around 400,000 years ago, another major advance appears clearly in the archaeological record. The wooden spears from Schoningen in Germany. These weapons were carefully shaped, well-balanced, and discovered alongside large quantities of processed horse remains. A spear completely changed the distance between human and animal. Instead of moving directly toward an opponent's teeth, a person could thrust from farther away or, in some situations, throw the weapon toward a target. Suddenly, a few extra meters could mean the difference between life and death. But there was another defensive idea that was almost beautifully simple. Instead of trying to overpower the charge of a large animal with your own muscles, let the ground absorb the force for you. A long spear could be braced firmly against the earth with its point facing an approaching animal. Similar techniques later appeared in many cultures that used long spears against large and dangerous animals. The principle was clever. The person holding the weapon did not need to generate all the force. The charging animal would bring most of the energy itself. And here is the remarkable part. An animal weighing hundreds of kilograms and moving at high speed can carry thousands of joules of kinetic energy, in some cases exceeding roughly 8,000 joules. If a spear is firmly braced and correctly positioned, the animal's own charge can become the force working against it. That means a group of humans did not need to be physically stronger than a bear, lion, or other massive predator. Everyone, from the strongest members to those with less physical strength, could contribute to the defense. Humans were discovering a principle that would follow us throughout history. Intelligence can turn an opponent's strength into a weakness. But humanity's real strength was never just spears, stones, or fire. Something even more unusual could happen when a predator attacked one member of the group. Instead of always fleeing to save themselves, humans could turn back, shout, throw stones, and chase the animal in an attempt to recover their companion. It was incredibly dangerous, but it sent a very clear message. Catching one human did not mean the meal was yours. Now the predator had an angry group coming after it. And that may have created consequences that lasted far beyond a single encounter. If a leopard could easily kill a human and feed without resistance, it might learn that humans were worth hunting. But if every attack brought screaming, flying stones, and a crowd of people chasing it down, the calculation became much less attractive. Recovering bodies and burying the dead may also have reduced opportunities for predators to become accustomed to feeding on human remains. Over time, humans were not the only ones learning fear. Predators were gaining reasons to fear humans too. But darkness remained a serious problem. Human vision becomes much less effective at night, while many predators become more active. So how could an entire group sleep without turning the campsite into an all-night buffet? This is where the sentinel theory gets interesting. A study of the Hadza people in Tanzania found that during roughly 20 days of observation, the entire group was simultaneously asleep for only about 18 minutes. At almost any given moment, someone was still awake or sleeping lightly enough to respond. And the reason was not necessarily that people were assigned guard duty like soldiers. Age differences can naturally create a surprisingly effective watch system. Teenagers often tend to stay awake later, while older adults frequently wake earlier. While younger members are still sitting near the fire, older people may already be asleep. By the time the younger group starts getting tired, some of the older members are beginning to wake. Different biological clocks accidentally create an overnight security network. Apparently, teenagers staying up late while grandparents wake before sunrise may have a very long history. Then a fossil from Dmanisi, Georgia, takes the story in a completely different direction. Archaeologists discovered the jaw of an elderly individual who lived around 1.8 million years ago and had lost nearly all of their teeth long before death. Think about that for a second. In a world with no blenders, no hospitals, and predators everywhere, someone who could barely chew still survived for years. That strongly suggests that other members of the group may have protected this person, shared food, and prepared softer meals that could be eaten without teeth. And this may have been the most powerful weapon humans ever developed. Not muscle, not fangs, the ability to care for someone who could no longer fully protect themselves. A group that kept older people, children, and injured members alive also preserved experience, memory, and knowledge across generations. Cooperation turned physically vulnerable individuals into part of something much stronger. We did not win because every human became stronger than a predator. We won because when one person became weak, others could stand around them. Over hundreds of thousands of years, all of these small advantages began to add up. Stones could strike from a distance. Spears kept dangerous teeth farther away. Fire protected camps. Coordinated groups made attacks increasingly risky. Meanwhile, many giant predators, including saber-toothed cats and short-faced bears, eventually declined and disappeared, although climate change, environmental shifts, and the loss of prey were also major factors. Human competition may have added pressure in some regions. The animal that had once been part of the menu was now competing near the top of the food chain. One of the most beautiful signs of that transformation lies deep inside Chauvet Cave in France. Around 36,000 years ago, humans entered the darkness and painted cave lions, bears, and other dangerous animals across the stone walls. And if you think about it, that is remarkable. Caves that may once have belonged to predators had become places where humans created art. These animals were no longer seen only as threats or sources of food. People watched them, remembered them, respected them, and brought them into a symbolic world of stories and images. But those ancient predators may not have disappeared completely from our lives. They may still echo through the way our brains react to darkness, sudden noises, or movement in the bushes. Many people react to snakes with immediate fear despite never having been attacked by one. Dreams of being chased are remarkably common. And when something strange makes a sound in the middle of the night, you may wake before you have even figured out what happened. The modern brain lives in a modern room, but its alarm system was built for a much older world. So the next time you sit around a fire, stay up late with friends, or suddenly shout because something moved in the darkness, remember that ordinary behaviors like these have a very long story behind them. Our ancestors began as small, slow creatures with no claws and no great fangs, surrounded by predators far stronger than they were. But they had fire. They had spears. They had the voices of the group. And most importantly, they had one another. The predators of the ancient world forced humans to become more alert, more inventive, and more cooperative. In the end, what saved us was not becoming the biggest monster in the landscape. It was learning to stand together when the monster arrived.